Welcome to Occupations, the podcast, where we discuss what it's like to hold specific jobs. Occupations is brought to you by lotsofmaps.com, where you fulfill your vintage map gifting needs. Visit lotsofmaps.com.
Hi there, Andy Jaggelinzer here for Occupations, the podcast. I am sitting in the lovely home of Bob Salley in Nashua, New Hampshire. And Bob and I are sitting down because he is a writer of graphic novels. And I've known Bob for a long time, and he kind of does this stuff sort of on the side, but he's been doing it for a long time. And I thought the listeners might be interested in graphic novels and how they're made and such. So welcome, Bob.
Thanks for having me. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.
Well, let's start at the very beginning. What the hell is the difference between a comic book and a graphic novel?
So a comic book would be about a 20 to 24 page book that they call it a floppy. It's like the thing that you go to a comic book shop and that's the thing that you're paying like maybe, $3 to buy. Yeah. Back in the day, they would always, back in my day, I'm 48 years old. So when I was a kid, the comic books would kind of be like a one and done. You'd read 20, 24 pages and that would be it. And then I think Marvel and DC started realizing, like, if they keep going, have an ongoing series, then you got to get the kids to come in, buy another one, leave it with a cliffhanger. And those are the comic books, the ones that they come out at, I want to say they come out on the Wednesdays. I think That's New Comic Book Day. And you go out there, you buy it, you buy a couple of them, you're buying Daredevil, you're buying Spider-Man, X-Men. And it's an ongoing story, but they're individually sold as a comic book or a floppy. A graphic novel would be a larger collection. You could have, they could be anywhere from 60 to, hundreds of pages. And they're thicker. Sometimes you can get them in hardback. And they have the chapter breaks. That's typically a one and done story. But you could leave those with a cliffhanger, and then you have a volume 1, a volume 2, and eventually you put them together in an omnibus, which has the whole collection together. So the difference I would say between a comic book and a graphic novel would be the size and the length of the story.
I'm holding one of your graphic novels right now in my hand, and the paper is thick. I mean, I know comic books from my day, and I'm going to totally date myself right now, but floppy,
right.
Thin paper, that kind of thing. This is definitely hard stock.
And the comic books that we read when we were younger, the reason why they're so expensive now is because they were printed on that like Macy's catalog type paper, and there was only a certain amount of them printed. So once they were done printing, there was no more. And typically they all, went to hell because they weren't printed on, really quality paper. But now what they're doing is they're putting them on, gloss matte or, paper. It's better quality. It lasts longer. And it with being digital now, as you can, right now, one of my stories, Ogre, which has been long out of print, just went back into print with a new cover, with new material, and they're selling it again because it's on digital and they can just do whatever they want with it. They can put it out again. Which back in when we were kids, like in the 70s, 80s, they didn't have that ability to do that.
Yeah, I can tell. I mean, usually when I think back of comics when I was a kid, the front covers were glossy.
Yes.
But the inside were not. They were like a newspaper kind of feel to them. But this is clearly thicker, but it's also, each page is definitely a glossy, which is nice. And how many pages is this?
I think that might have been like 80.
Yeah. It's a good long strip. Bob, let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Levittown, Pennsylvania, which is suburbs right outside of Philadelphia. And, went to school. Always as a kid, just wanted to write, wanted to tell stories. I loved comic books. As a kid, like when you're doing anything, you kind of imitate what you know. I would always make up my own X-Men, and I'd call him something else. Like I had a guy that looked like Wolverine, but he was called something else. And so it's just, that's the first stages of being creative, is that you imitate what you know. And then as you do that, you start, roughing out edges, and you start kind of creating your own path and doing your own things.
Do you remember your first comic book you ever bought? Or was bought for you?
The first comic book I ever bought was Well, the first one that was ever bought for me, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But the first, I remember and it might not be the first one I bought, but the first one that I remember was X-Men Inferno. It was a mega series. Like a mega series is when something happens over the entire publishing company. Like, so Marvel, they stopped everything they were doing and all their titles were basically this Inferno where I'm not even going to try to remember everybody, but there was, Mr. Sinister, actually, that was the bad guy. So Mr. Sinister comes out and he just totally wrecks the world. And if you bought Daredevil, if you bought Spider-Man, if you bought any Marvel title, it was within this was what was going on within the world of Marvel, was this Inferno, the world turned upside down. And the first one I bought was the first introduction to Inferno with X-Men. And I loved it. And then I just kept buying more and more. And then realizing that there was other titles that kind of intertwined with the X-Men story. So every Wednesday, me and my buddies, we would ride our bikes to, the comic shop, and I'd probably walk out of there with maybe 5 or 6 comics, and you just had to keep going back. And that's what hooked me, the X-Men.
You eventually started writing on your own. Were you ever taught how this whole thing comes together? Or did you just start writing and start drawing pictures and putting them together? Well,
so I was always fascinated with writing. So when I went to college, University of Pittsburgh, I focused on English and creative writing, and I loved it. But I never, I learned how to write, prose. I learned how to write poems. I learned how to write play forms, all that. But we didn't learn how to write comic books. It wasn't really the thing that people were doing. So the origin of me writing a comic book all started while I was hanging out with this coworker of mine, Scott Palmer. And we were at a bar, and this bar had a tube TV up on the shelf, and it would always play classic movies, but it would have the sound off. And one night he and I were there drinking, and I was at a point in my life where I just was not writing. And if you talk to anybody who is a writer and has that in them, when they're not writing, they're miserable. That's a part of their life that they feel like they're not doing, and they don't have the drive to do it. And and you want to. So we were sitting at the bar, and Star Wars was on. The original Star Wars movie was on. And at the end, the Death Star blows up, and I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, there's probably a lot of good trash, from this Death Star. There's probably a lot of valuable stuff now floating around in space. And I just thought, what if, there was a crew or a crews out there hired by companies or to go out there and collect all this garbage in space. So that's where my first title, Salvagers, came from. And at the time, like I said, I was working at InterSystems, and I was working in the facilities department. And there was some cast of characters that I was working with. So it kind of became this little side project that I was doing in my free time. I had this crew, and there was about 9 people. You had a captain, you had a navigator, you had a pilot, you had a maintenance guy, all that. And I kind of adopted the personalities of the people that I was working with, because I was working with them. So if I was working on a character, I'd be thinking this guy, Tim, I'm he would be very grumpy, and I'd say, all right, I'm going to inject Tim into this character.
Love it.
And it would just be that. It wasn't even storytelling at that point. It was just, having characters and writing down their personalities, their backgrounds. And as a writer who's, if you ever hit writer's block, that's what your professors tell you to do. Just write. Right. Doesn't matter what you're writing, just write words, and then it'll eventually start producing more. That's the habit that I got into, is I would come up with a character, and then I just knew, I need a background. I need, information about them. And I would just start writing down a list of things that were applied to this character. Some of them you would toss out, but then eventually I had, I think it was 9 characters. And then I realized, if I'm going to write this story, that 9 characters is way too many. So I'm they're on a ship. I gave the ship artificial intelligence, was able to wipe out half the crew. So then I had about 4 characters, and I really focused on them. And then they were all human when I first started developing it, but then I wanted to have more fun with it. So I made them aliens, and that was it. I just, I had these characters, and then I was ready to have them interact.
Right.
And what really got me into it was my wife at the time, well, my girlfriend at the time, she was pregnant, and I knew, I was like, all right, this is something I'm not going to ever be able to do. Because once my daughter's born, it's going to have to be, serious, not playing around with writing comic books. So I talked to her. I said, I'm going to really put my energy into putting out one comic book of this. So that way I could say later in life, I did it, and never, have that, thing in the back of your mind of like, I wonder if I could have.
Sure.
So I did it. I found an artist, and I paid him, and we made the comic book. And it's probably the crappiest comic book that I made out of all the comic books that I've made, because I didn't know how to write. So that's a long walk to get to what you asked me.
That's okay.
So I did not know how to write a comic book. I didn't know anything about producing a comic book, and then like anybody, I just thought like, you write a script, send it to a comic book publisher, and if they like it, then they'll just throw a bunch of money at you and they'll take it. That's not the case. Yeah. They want you to make it yourself and like see how it goes. So I ended up going on to Dark Horse Comic, and on their website at the time, I don't know if it's still there, they show you the format of how they want their comic book scripts submitted. So I took that, and to this day, I still write in Dark Horse Comics the way that they like it. But I just got used to it. I kept writing that way, and like that just became my way. But like when I would do podcasts about talking about comics, and people would say like, how, what's the best way to write a comic? I would always say the best way to write a comic is the way you're comfortable writing a comic.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so anyway, went on Dark Horse, saw their script and the way they did it, and I wrote it, and I made this comic. And then just at that time, social media started, like Facebook became a thing. And then I kind of put everything out there, and I started looking for comic book groups. And I gave that comic book away. Like my artist made it a digital copy of it, and I gave that comic book away to so many people. And I gave it away to all the podcasters that were doing it to introduce myself. And then I went to a Comic-Con, and I'm sitting there. I got this 6x6 table, and I got one comic book. And I got a bunch of them, but I got this one comic book nobody knew of, and some people would buy it, but I'd have tons by the Sunday. And I'd just start giving them away. I would just give them away to people because I was like, I'd rather leave here with nothing, having people have it. And always, every time I gave it away, I'd lead them to my Facebook page and all that. And then I just started generating a fan base. And then seeing that, then my girlfriend is now my wife at the time, and I have a kid. And, we found Kickstarter, and Kickstarter was a way for independent people to produce their comics and not break the bank. Yep. And it was also a great way to get your comic out. It was almost like a pre-sale format for people to buy your comic, and then you produce it and then you give it to them.
Yep.
So that is kind of how I got into it, where it just kept growing. It grew legs. Like the fan base grew. I had the means now through social media and Kickstarter to fund the project. And, it kind of snowballed and got bigger and bigger. And then, and I moved on to other things, and that was it.
Let's back up a little bit more. So you did study English and you studied writing. What were you writing?
So when I was in college, I was writing a lot of poems. Okay. And I was writing short stories, and, there was magazines that you could submit them to. I had like 2 or 3 short stories that were published in, some magazines that were out in Pittsburgh, which was great. It made you feel like, you got validation there that what you're doing is worth something.
Was it fiction, or what were you writing?
It was fiction. I did not like writing. I when we were going over like electives and all that, they were pushing me toward journalism, and I had no interest in that. So that's how I got into poetry. I never wrote poems before. So when I was in my class, the professor would always start, by saying like, who wants to share their poems? And I'd be the first one with my hand up.
Nice.
And nobody else would. Nobody else wanted to share their poems because it's you're putting your heart on the line there.
Sure.
And then one day the professor pulled me aside and asking me like, I need more people to share their stuff. Like, why are you so eager to share your stuff? And I was like, because I don't know what I'm doing. Like I don't know how to write poems. So I want people to read it and to criticize it and to tell me like how to do it better. And And I think sharing it and doing all that, I really loved writing poems. Like, it was great. I don't do that anymore, but at the time in college, it was awesome because I think it was new.
Yeah. Would you enjoy doing it again, you think?
You know what? I think maybe. I always think of poems. You got to be tortured. You got to be a tortured soul to write good poetry. And like, I'm just too happy now that, I always say, like, Fiona Apple. I loved Fiona Apple when she was tortured. And like now when she puts out stuff and she's happy, I'm like, it's no good.
It's true. Art is definitely a child of the folks that are suffering. Did you ever feel like you were unoriginal and maybe doing something that somebody else was doing?
When I came up with the concept for Salvagers,
Yeah.
the first thing that I did was I thought, like, there's no way that, I'm smart enough to come up with this and nobody else did. So I just I went through the internet just looking to see, like, has this already been done?
Right.
And then I remember, like, I talked about it to one person that I worked with and they were like, oh, it's like Firefly. So immediately I'm like, all right, I gotta watch. Like, and I never watched, and it's weird because I was a huge sci-fi fan. Yeah. He couldn't believe, he's like, I can't believe you've never watched Firefly. Right. So then I watched Firefly and I liked it. The movie was better. I didn't really get into the series, but seeing that, I'm like, okay, it's not like that. That they're more like like an A-team in space, like, rather than people that the whole concept of Salvagers was coworkers.
Right.
Like, it was like, they're not band together to go save the world. They are working together because they all had a reason to. Right. They all needed money. They all had, and like each personality had their own struggles of making money, just like we all do in work. And I thought that that's what made it unique. That's what made Salvagers unique, is that, there was the captain was running away from his past. The pilot, she was piloting the ship because she was arrested for smuggling, and this was part of her work release from prison, was that she had to fly a garbage truck. And then then you had your mechanic and like your the brawn and everything, and they had their reasons. The brawn actually, Tyr, he was on it because his species, his people, they were looked at as like a horrible species because they tried to annihilate a planet. They became kind of reclusive because everybody in the galaxy, nobody liked them. So he got on the ship to kind of hide from everybody though in the world. And then the mechanic, he was an alcoholic gambler who was always in debt. So he needed money to get himself out of debt and to buy booze. So that was it. Like, they weren't trying to save the world, and they were almost like a John McClane type group of like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be saving the world. I just want to, do what I'm doing. Right. So that was kind of the uniqueness of Salvagers.
I love the concept. I love that.
What's funny tremendous. Is that I wish that if I started writing Salvagers now, it would be so much fucking better than it was. It would be so much. And I've talked to my editor-in-chief about it all the time, and he always said, he's like, I wish that I would have met you when you came up with the concept of Salvagers. Yeah. He's like, because we could have done it so much better. And I was like, I know. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. And so when I started it as, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. In my mind, I'm like, this is going to be a 12-issue series. Like, and then like ask anybody that knows anything in the comic book industry to like, so you figured 12 issues is what you were going to start your career as a, like, usually it's like, do like one story, like maybe 3 issues but I'm like 12. Yeah, I'm going to do 12. No idea what I'm doing. I'm going to do 12.
But that's good, right? Yeah. I mean, you're doing your own thing. I mean, we hear about these artists that later on, when they realize how they went about doing their thing on their own, they're kind of amazed. Right. I know hearing a story about Robbie Robertson, the guitarist from the band. Right. And he grew up listening to Chicago blues on radio at home, and he never saw a band because he lived in the middle of nowhere, and he was just listening, and he would have a guitar, and he'd be like, how do they do that? And he figured out how to do a slide, but a slide, a slide. Right. He figured out how to do it with his fingers because he had no idea that they were actually using a bottle or and then later on when he found out, he's like, oh man, how did I do it? And other people were like, how the hell are you doing that with your fingers? So sort of the same idea that it's like, okay, you have what you know and you to work with, right? And it gets you to where you're trying to go.
Yeah. And then again, like when I did Ogre, that was when I met the publisher and my editor-in-chief, Travis McIntyre, who taught me more about comic books than anybody else could have. And we did Ogre. And I came to him with this concept of like this down on his luck hero. Mm-hmm. And he was chained to this troll and all this stuff. And he was just, and he took that and he was like, what if we do it this way? And let's have an ogre. And he's chained to a dead man and he's being haunted by the dead man's ghost. And I was just like, and I'm like, that's so much better. And then, but then my story injected into just that made so much more sense. And it worked better.
Right. That's why they're professional and do what they do.
Yeah, that's why editor-in-chiefs are so important.
Right. So the original Salvagers, you ended up publishing yourself?
So I published the first volume myself. Yep. George Acevedo was the artist, and then found a letterer, found a colorist, all that on my own, and hired them. Had no idea what I was doing. It was like, and George kind of knew what he was doing, but he didn't either. And then the letterer, actually, HDE. Letterers, a lot of letterers don't like going by their real names, so they come up with stuff. I have no idea why.
And explain to me what a letterer is.
A letterer, they're the ones that put the letters in the balloons for a comic book.
Okay.
Like a letterer.
Yeah. Okay.
And obviously, that's great radio that I just did there. I'm pointing to a book and saying, the letterer.
That's all right. I'll explain. He pointed to a book and he pointed to a bubble and it had words in it.
Yeah. So HDE, he actually worked on comic books, many comic books. So he knew how to produce them.
Got it.
So he was great. He helped us out so much.
Who did the printing? Did you hire a local printing?
I used Kablam. Kablam was like, they must have loved this time in the industry.
Yeah.
Where all these people are like, I'm going to make my own comic books. And Kablam, like you would send them in their files and Kablam would put it all together for you and send it to you at such a huge price. Because, you're only buying like, you're buying like 100.
Right.
And they're like, all right, it's going to cost you $10 each. And you're like, and then you're like, I have to sell these things more. And then like, you're selling them for more than $10 to try to make a profit. And I never did. I didn't care about making the profit. I just wanted to get it out there.
Sure.
So Kablam. And I remember the first time that with my publisher where I didn't have to go through Kablam, and I was so happy that I didn't have, because they would always put their advertisement on the back of it because it would save you $2 an issue.
Right.
And at $2 an issue, you're like, all right, put your ad on the back of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, Kablam would do it. And HDE, funny story, I didn't know that you had to get a letterer. I just thought, I was like, I'll just have George, the artist, do it. And George was like, I'm not a letterer. And I'm like, can you do it? And he's like, sure. So we put these pages out and it was horrible. Like it looked so bad. And I put them, but I didn't know. Obviously I knew that it didn't look right. I knew that it didn't look like professional.
So what is it that a letterer does that an artist can't?
Right. So letterers, they have software.
Yeah.
They have to buy fonts. Like you have to buy fonts and all that. So the artist, he did the lettering on a few pages and I posted them up on Facebook. And HDE saw the postings that I put up there, took them, photoshopped the letters out of it and put his own lettering in it. And he's like, I'm not trying to do this to get you to hire me. I just want you to see what good lettering looks like.
Smart business.
Right. Yeah. So then I hired him.
Wow, that's amazing. Was it just like not centered properly?
They weren't really good balloons. They were just, I wish that I'd saved those because it was bad.
See, I'm learning because I had no idea what a letterer is and that you need that.
Do you know what a flatter is? I didn't know what a flatter was. A flatter is, so you hire a colorist. The colorist sends the pages to a flatter. The flatter puts down the primary colors that the colorist is then going to go over with more detailed coloring. And I didn't know that well. I mean, well into my career in doing comic books, because I think I kept using the same colorist, and then I hired a new colorist, and they asked me. They said, "All right, well, who's the flatter?" And I was like, "I don't know what they're asking me," and I felt embarrassed because I'm like, and I had to look it up, and I looked it up, and I still wasn't clear on what it was. So I just asked him. I was like, "Well, do you have I said we can use any flatter.
Yeah.
Do you have a flatter that you like to use?" He goes, "Well, I do have my own flatter." I'm like, "Let's use them." And then later I had told him the whole story, and he was like, and then he explained it.
So are they adding details that the artist didn't?
It's more that it's kind of like if you ever watched like Bob Ross paint a painting.
Sure.
And the first thing he does, no matter what he's painting, is he puts down white paint on the canvas.
Sure.
So it's kind of like that, except different colors. Like if they know, like, all right, it's a landscape, they'll put green on the bottom, and they'll put, I guess they'll read it and they'll be like, what time of day is it? It's, it's dawn. All right, we're going to put some red up there so we can see the sun rising. Or
so it's kind of like a base for what you're trying to do.
The flatters are basing the page and the panels to prepare for the colorist.
That's very cool.
It's amazing, like how many people
I'm looking at this.
have to go into. Yeah. I mean, you got again, great radio here. I'm showing him the credits page, and it's just filled with all these different people, the pencil and inks, and then there's all the different people that go into creating a comic book, and you have to pay those people.
Really?
That's why novels are so much easier.
Yeah, right.
So they say, because writing a novel is its own great task.
This is a master class. I mean, that's what this series is about, occupations, because I'm learning about what you're doing, and I'm sure I look like a dummy doing it, but that's okay. I don't mind. So you probably took a bath money-wise, although you did say you raised some money through Kickstarter.
Well, the first comic I did, I paid for myself. If I had to remember correctly, like maybe all in, it might have cost me like $2,500.
Well, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I was using people that weren't in the industry, so
Sure.
they were taking a lot less.
Got it.
As I got into doing more and working with professionals, it got a lot more expensive.
Sure.
And then you're doing, you do cover art and all that. And the next 3 that I did through Kickstarter for that one story arc probably cost me $2,500 each. And then we did it through Kickstarter. So I think I looked to raise, $5,000. So you could pay for the production, the shipping, and all the extra stuff, like the rewards that you give them for reaching different goals.
Sure.
Lotsofmaps.com. Vintage, local, national, and world maps for an affordable price. 99% of our maps are $25 or less. Great as gifts. Frame them or put them under glass for your home, vacation home, or as a memory of a special place. Lotsofmaps.com.
So that first comic got you a fan base.
Yes.
I mean, and it also gave you experience.
100%.
So what else did it give you? Anything else that you can think of?
I mean, it gave me a drive. It gave me a love for the industry. It gave me a love for writing comics.
So even though you gave it away, you still call that a success, I would assume.
Yeah, because I mean, had I not given it away, I probably wouldn't have gained the fan base, because who wants to take a shot at a comic they never heard of?
Yep.
That's one issue
Yep.
that honestly, like if you opened it up at a comic shop, like it didn't look great.
Sure.
It didn't look, and when I say it didn't look great, it didn't look like Spider-Man. It didn't look like it looked like an independently done comic book.
Sure.
So, when you're at a Comic Con and you're looking, you're going to spend money and you don't know what you're getting into, and you're like, am I going to buy this one comic and I'm never going to hear about it ever again? So I was okay handing it out. And then it got better. Like when I got the second comic book, it got better because I'm like, now I got 2. Like now you have a little bit more credibility because you got 2. And then every comic you did, it was more like you got bigger and people paid more attention to you.
Yep.
And then publishers paid more attention to you because they know how hard it is to make a comic book, let alone to have 3 or a graphic novel now. And you did that and you've been out there and they see that your fan base is growing, and those small to mid-level publishers, they pay attention to that because they know, all right, this guy's serious. This guy's doing something right. And maybe with a little guidance, we can help him to get to the next level, which I 100% did.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to say that money is the thing that makes it successful, but I guess it's kind of showing off that the fact is, if you're doing your first whatever it is that you're doing, you got to take away the fact that you're coming away with experience and you're learning as you go, right?
100%. And I think that applies to most things that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Not just comic books. Like if you're passionate about something, you'll do it not for money.
Right.
You'll do it because you love it.
Absolutely.
To use the term for the love of the game. I didn't care about making money to do comic books. I just wanted comics. Like I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it.
Sure.
I wanted to, like as a writer, I wanted to see like that I actually had stories to tell, and I was able to tell them in a way that people were interested and that wanted more.
Right.
So for me, it was never about the money. It was always about creating and creating characters.
Sure.
It was and I think that, the books were successful because it wasn't the story that I was creating. You start with characters. And one of the advice that I give people that are writers is that always start with the characters. Let the characters guide you through the story, not the story guide you through the characters.
And so you're a A-type personality.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you put yourself out there, you have drive, you're fun and playful with people, and you love talking, which is great. I'm not picking on you, but putting that together with a piece of art, and I'll call it art because that's kind of what you're making here, because the art might sell itself, but without your drive and your pushing it, what would have happened to your comic?
Well,
do you think?
It wouldn't have gone anywhere.
Yeah.
Because the artists aren't pushing it. Well, the artists that I was working with at the time weren't pushing it.
Right.
Because they did the art for the money, and then that was it. So it was me. I was the one that was hustling it. I was the one out there at conventions selling it. I was the one that was trying to come up with fun things to do, to interact on social media,
Sure.
to get people to share, and learning the algorithms of social media. Because you would post things and you'd be like, this is getting no traction.
Yep.
And then you found out, oh, there's algorithms that are keeping this from spamming people's feeds. So then you had to figure out, all right, how do I get past that?
Yep.
And like I remember the first thing was, don't share a link, share a picture, and then put the link in the comments.
Got it.
So that was like, so it'd be like little things like that you would learn. Gary Vee, I read a lot of his books because he was big into like how to use social media. A lot of people don't like him, but he had a book called Jab, 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 Right Hook, which was awesome. Like it was basically like on social media, like give a little, give a little, give a little, then hit them with what you want to hit them with.
Yep.
And that will drive your social media. But as far as like the writing and the art, yes, I think the writing in itself was an art form, because when you're writing, you are writing and you have to visualize what this is going to look like. And I remember the first thing that I was told by my artist was, he was like, that this is just a picture, right? It can't move, because I would write things like, he punched him and he fell to the ground. And he's like, that can't happen like all in one panel, right? So that was one thing I had to learn, but you can't have one without the other. There has to be good writing. There has to be good art. Art is what will get somebody to buy the comic book.
Sure.
The writing is what will get them to buy the next comic book.
Yeah, right.
And if you buy a comic book and it's got beautiful art, but the story's flat, you're not going to go back. Like, you don't care.
Yep.
If you don't, and again, that's where we go to the characters. The characters are so important because the characters are what people come back for. You think about anything you watch, it's the characters that you fall in love with, and the story is secondary.
Yep. So obviously you do the character development on your own as far as personalities and their backstory and stuff. How about the looks of the character? Are you working on that? You have a thing in your mind and now you need to tell the the artist, okay, look, he's got a pug nose and he's got brown hair and how do you work that out?
I definitely would usually have an idea of what I want my character to look like. When George and I were working, George Acevedo, who helped me do Salvagers and create the characters and all that, there was a lot of back and forth. Like basically like Brigby, who ended up looking more lizard. I remember I told him, I was like, I want him to look like half monkey, half lizard. So we'd go back and forth. And then eventually he sent me, he would just send me a bunch of concepts. And then I would pick one and I'd be like, and I'd see it and you'd be like, that's it. And that was one of the things that I always loved about the development part of doing comics, is working with the artists to come up with what the characters look like, what a spaceship looked like or anything, is that they would send you like 6. They'd do like 6 concepts.
Wow.
But you would look at one and you just knew, you were like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, and you knew like it was always that. Like, even if if it wasn't what I thought it was, like I knew like that's him.
It clicks. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And that's just such an awesome moment. Yeah. Like when you see one of your characters for the first time, then you're like, that's him.
That's a lot of work for an artist to have to do
is.
6 different things and 5 of them are rejected.
Right. But I think that they probably are like, look, this is the one I want. I'm going to do some over here that I don't even care about because I want them to focus on this one. But there were times for certain characters that a look would be a part of the character.
Yep.
Like Broken Gargoyles, Manco has half of his face blown up. So, he lost an eye, he's scarred, and he wears a prosthetic mask. So like those were important things for that character, obviously, because that was one of the main things for that character. But then other characters, I would tell them like, I don't really care what this character looks like. They just need to be older. Or, there was one character in Broken Gargoyles that it was a little girl who had a hair lip, and she was a part of the circus, and she was the cat girl. And they surgically put on dog ears to make her look like it. But it was important for her character that she looked a certain way. So yeah, there are times where you're like, this character, and visually you're like, I need this character to look this way. And then there's other characters where you're like, dealer's choice.
I imagine that's also the same with settings, right? Is there some of that? Like, okay, he needs to be in a desert and it's got a strange color to the sky. I mean, there must be something along the lines of that
when
too,
you're doing
right?
Sci-fi, there is.
Yeah.
Like there was like, and again, like there's times like where my love for Star Wars will come into play.
Sure.
Where like, we were doing Salvagers and I wanted this ship to crash into this planet. And I was just like, we haven't done like a Dagobah system yet. Like I was like, we haven't done swampy yet. Like, so I was like, I'd love it to be swampy. And I knew, I'm like, he's creative enough, he'll figure it out. But that's all I would say. I'd be like, and I told him, I was like, I want it to be like Dagobah swampy. And he did it and he did a great job. That's awesome. He put like different, alien creatures like in the trees and everything, so it looked awesome.
All right, let's move forward from the first graphic novel. What happened next? Because you mentioned Broken Gargoyles and we haven't talked about that yet. So the
next one was Ogre.
So what happened to the first one as far as the
Salvagers?
The Salvagers. Did you put out more, or was
I did. So we kept doing that as a series. Source Point Press picked it up as a publisher. We remastered. We did a whole remastering of the first story arc, the first graphic novel, the first chapter, if you will, and put a new cover on it for Source Point Press. And it did great. And then we kept going with Volume 2. And then Volume 3 is where kind of the industry kind of imploded during COVID, and I never finished it.
So actually, before you go on, so Source Point, did they approach you?
Yeah, it was kind of, we were at, I was at Chicago Comic-Con, and we knew of each other. Like they knew of me, I knew of them. I wanted to meet them. I was doing a new comic book on my own, and they were interested in it.
Yeah.
And we had a talk at Chicago Comic-Con, and they picked it up. It was Shelter Division. And Shelter Division was, you had an alien, you had the son of Bigfoot, and you had an immortal that were like, so it was kind of like X-Files, but it was like, the strange people from X-Files, they were the agents.
Right.
It was fun. It was kind of like, I just wanted to do it, but that's what got me into Source Point Press. And then when I came in with that, they told me, they're like, we're really interested in salvagers. So I was like, all right.
What do you think they liked about salvagers? Now, it's a business, right?
Right.
Were those guys interested in making money, or were they interested in the art and
they were 100% interested in money.
Okay.
Yeah, publishers, like, they are spending money, so they want to make money.
Right.
They started off as like more of a horror publisher, and they were looking to get into not being just horror. They were looking to do some other things. They didn't have a sci-fi, like a Star Wars-ish type sci-fi comic book yet. And, I talked to the creative director and the editor-in-chief, and they loved it. They thought it was unique. They could see like that it, was popular. And I think more so, they also saw that I was out there. I was hustling it.
That was my next question.
Right.
Is it more than just the comic book, but you also get this A-type personality who's
Right.
willing to go
and
into
100%. Like, they wanted to get salvagers because they loved the title, but they also wanted to get salvagers because they wanted me.
Right.
And they wanted somebody who was going to hustle their title, because bringing a title to a publisher, the best person to sell it is the person that loves it and the person that's creating it. So they wanted the title and they wanted me.
Got it.
And it was great. I mean, I remember I met them and I thought, like, that is where I want to be. I loved the people that worked there. And it was awesome. Like, it was the 5 years that I was doing it with them. Like, it was so much fun. Going to conventions and hanging out and getting to know them and just working with them, and working with the creative director and Travis McIntyre, the editor-in-chief. It made me a better writer. That was when I learned the most.
Did you end up doing the 12 mega series issues of Salvagers that you wanted to do?
Came up 2 issues short. I did 10.
Oh, that's impressive, though.
10. Yeah, I did 10 issues, and the artist that I was using for the last volume, he had some personal things come up, and he wasn't able to finish. And then COVID kind of hit the industry hard, and I just never able to finish those last 2 issues.
So while Salvagers was doing their thing, while your part of it was done, were you creating different stories?
Yep. So while the artistic team was going on and producing Salvagers, I was at a convention in Philadelphia, and I ran into Sean Daly, who will forever be one of my favorite human beings and one of my favorite artists. And he was in Artist Alley. I was at the publisher's booth, and I would always just walk up and down Artist Alley, and I saw his work. And he was just he had such a magnetic personality that you just loved talking to him. Really nice guy. I was talking about his art, and he said to me, he's like, I'd love to work with you on something sometime. And to me, like, that was the first time an artist said that to me. So I immediately, like, after I left that convention, like, I just started thinking, like, what could I write that would fit his type of artwork?
That must have felt good.
It felt great. It felt great to have somebody say that they want to work with you.
Yeah.
And then that's when I had this concept for this fantasy story where I had this reluctant hero. He was imprisoned to a ogre, and he was chained up with a troll who was also dragging around a dead troll that he was talking to. And I came up with this concept. I didn't write the whole story yet, but I came up with this concept. I took it to Travis McIntyre, who was the editor-in-chief at Source Point Press. He kind of mulled over it for a couple days, and then he and I had a meeting, and we changed it around to an ogre who was chained to a reluctant hero who is dead, and he was haunted by the ghost of that reluctant hero who was dead. And it became less serious. My version of it was a very serious comic or a story, and this one became serious, but it was more lighthearted, and I liked that. And it fit Sean Daly's art. And then that was it. I stopped. Everything I did focused on writing this story, Ogre. And I'll never forget, I wrote issue 1. It was approved. And then I wrote issue 3. And when I got it back from the editor. He said that it was really good. And it was the first time that an editor ever said the word really good to me. So I knew, and he didn't throw around really good a lot. So then I knew, I was like, all right, we're on to something here. And then we did Ogre. Sean's work was amazing. And it was probably the comic book that I was most proud of producing.
Wow, nice.
Because at that point, I knew what I was doing.
Yep.
I knew how to story tell in visual art form. And it actually got nominated for a Ringo Award, which would be like, if the Oscars are like the Eisner Award, Ringo would be like the Emmys.
Okay.
So, it didn't win, but being nominated was...
That's amazing.
Because you're being nominated with like top professionals. So that was a big moment. So that was where I thought, I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm not just doing this for fun. I'm actually up there doing it with people that, are looked at as, the big wigs in the industry.
So how did you approach your fans that were fans of the first novel?
This was just something new.
Okay.
This was like, hey, like I have a second title that I'm working. So in the comic book world, like you could have multiple titles that you're working on.
Got it.
And I think that the industry understands that. Like you're a writer, so you're writing it, your job's done.
Yep.
Now you're on to the next project while that's all being done. So I didn't have to really approach them as abandoning salvagers. It was more like, hey, I have a new thing I'm doing. Like I'm doing a fantasy story.
Was there a buzz at the time?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that's great.
The thing that I think with comic book industry is the fans, they buy you. They don't buy your book.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't, if you keep coming out with new books, they're not buying the book because they're interested in the book. They're buying the book because they're interested in you and they believe in you.
Nice.
So they want to see what you keep coming out with. Like Stephen King.
Right.
He comes out with a new book. You're not buying the book. You're buying Stephen King.
Right.
Because you trust Stephen King. You know that I love Stephen King's books. I'm going to buy whatever he's putting out because I know that he is going to put out a good product.
Right.
And that goes to like when you're out there at conventions and you're on social media and you're interacting with these people, your fans, how you interact with them is huge. Like I always said, like, don't be a dick. Because
wise words,
right? Like and treat them. I always, anytime anybody would buy my book, like, be like, you're my favorite person in the world. Like you spent your money on my book, and you didn't have to.
right?
So I always was appreciative, and if I always enjoyed like running into them. Like you'd talk to somebody on Facebook constantly, and then you'd go to a convention and. Usually they'd come up to you with their arms out being like, hey, and you're like, hey, I have no idea who you are because, you have a cartoon character as your profile picture, or when they meet you face to face, they feel like they know you. And that's probably like how we are with sports figures, like
Sure.
If I ran into Patrick Mahomes, I would look at him and I'd be like, dude, what's up? And he'd be like, I don't know you. And I'd be like, but I know you. So it's kind of like that. They definitely follow you and they want to see what you're putting out. And the next thing was Broken Gargoyles, which was a diesel punk story. So, and that's one of the best advices that, the publishers gave me is, look, you already did sci-fi. Don't do sci-fi again. Do something else. So that's what I kept trying to, push myself and work outside of the box on things that I wasn't used to.
Broadening the horizons.
Right.
Yeah. Ogre, how many issues of Ogre did you do?
There's 2 volumes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was it. We did 1 volume and it did really well. Like I said, it sold out immediately. They went to second print. And then, the publisher was like, to me, myself and Sean Daly, like, you guys got to do another one.
Yeah, right.
Sean and I were playing around with it and we both loved Alien and Aliens, where it was like, an alien, you had 1 alien. And then Aliens, you had multiple aliens.
Sure.
So we're like, look, we're not going to call it Ogre 2. We're just going to do ogres, and it's going to be more ogres.
Yep.
And the story takes place at the same time as Ogre takes place. And there's even a moment, there's a scene where it's happening. The scene happens at the same place and time that Ogre, the scene happens, and they're kind of mirroring each other. But they go in different directions. So it was fun. And again, it got me to work with Sean again. And he was the most fun that I ever had working in comics was working with Sean, because not only was he a great artist, but he's also a great writer. He's probably a better writer than I am. So he taught me a lot about writing comic books.
That's great. You finish something, you're on to the next thing. That point when you had sold out Ogre and they went into second print, and then your publishing house says, we need a second one. How long from that point did Ogre 2 take to put out?
Ogre 2 didn't take that long because Sean was, we had already worked together. So there was less, I didn't have to write as much.
Okay.
After working with Sean, I knew I can tell him like, look, these next 2 pages, like this is what we need. And he would do it himself. And with Ogres, I was actually writing Broken Gargoyles and Ogres at the same time. And Broken Gargoyles took a lot more of my time because I was working with a new artist on it. But Sean, and I told him that when we got into doing Ogres, I was like, I'm doing Broken Gargoyles. So there's going to be some pages that I might just be like, Sean's discretion.
Right.
And I think he liked those pages a lot.
So ballpark, what kind of timeline from when you were told you need to do this till it actually hit?
I wrote the script. I think I wrote the script within like 2 or 3 weeks. I think the script was finished, edited, rewritten, done, 3 weeks. And then Sean was an animal. Like he would roll out of bed and he would just start drawing, and he would do it in watercolors.
Wow.
So he did it in ink and watercolors, which is beautiful. It's one of the reasons why Ogre is just such a visually beautiful book. And if you haven't seen it, like just, Google Ogre comic book, and you'll see Sean's work, Sean Daly.
We'll have links for folks to go check out your stuff.
And he crushed it. We made it a little bit bigger. Ogre was about, I think, 3 chapters long. Ogres was 4 chapters long. Mm-hmm. And I want to say like within a month, maybe month and a half, he had it done. He lettered it too. He did all the lettering and all that. So within a month and a half, it was done to the publisher and they sent it out. So from the time I started writing it, maybe 5 months later, it was hitting shelves.
It's pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's how the publisher looked at it, as like, let's hit the iron while the...
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Well, and the same thing goes with the music industry, and
right.
That's really interesting to see the timeline of how fast could you put something out, right?
And that's and most of the time it took forever.
Yeah, right.
Salvagers, like those issues, they took like 6 months, and that was just the artist because he had a full-time job, and he'd come home from work and be like, I got a page done, got a page and a half done.
Right.
So it took a long time.
Did any of the guys at your work that you had taken their personalities, did they know you were doing that?
In the beginning, they did not. Again, Facebook was fairly new, and I stayed away from friending people from work.
Sure.
I did not tell anybody from work that I was doing this. And then, I was at Boston Comic Con, and then 2 coworkers came up to my table, and they were like, "What is this?" And I was just like, "It's a little side project that I'm doing." And then, then more and more people found out about it. And
but what about the personalities? Did they?
No, they didn't know.
They never knew.
Yeah, they would never have known.
They don't know to this day.
To this day, they don't know. And it's not bad. It was just, there was, my tech alien. He was this guy, Bill Walsh, I worked with. Like he was, anytime like, I needed tech services help and he came by, like he would just sit there and talk so technically to me. Things that are like, he's speaking Greek,
right?
But he would be like, I don't understand why you can't get this. And I'm like, well, because it's really complicated and you had to go to school to learn it. Like, and but I loved that about him. And then that's what my, Brigby, the tech guy, like on the ship, like he just looks at everybody like, you guys are idiots. Like you can't figure this out on your own. But what he's doing is super complicated.
Right.
So so that was one of them.
That's what's kind of great, is because if everyone knew what was going on in your book,
right,
it wouldn't be real, right?
Exactly.
I mean, we're all different personalities. We all think of things differently.
And that's the thing with Salvagers that I really wanted to put into the sci-fi world. There's a scene where, these 2 aliens get on this ship that is a ship that has 4 armed aliens. Like they built it. So this one pilot gets into the pilot seat, and this pilot can fly any ship. But then they're like, why aren't we going? And she's like, I need 2 more arms. So then Brigby has to sit, because he's a smaller guy, he has to sit on her lap and control the other 2 arms. And that's like, because I always thought whenever you watched any sci-fi movie, it's like, how can they just get into any ship and know how to fly it?
That's
like,
beautiful. I love that.
I wanted that kind of complication to be like where it's not, that's not the case.
The continuity problem, but
right.
Normally you don't go there. So
Exactly.
I think that's very cool. I love that. All right. So tell me a little bit about when COVID hit, because you've mentioned a couple of times already that the industry took a real big hit during that time. So explain to me what actually happened there.
Well, so most of the mid to smaller publishers, they make a lot of their money at conventions. When you have, hundreds of thousands of people coming through on 3 to 4 days buying your comic books, they have to pay for the space in advance. And when they pay for that space, they are looking at it as an investment of, I'm paying for this, say it's $25,000 for the weekend. Now they know like, all right, we'll probably make $50,000 to $75,000. There's your profit. If you're walking away with $50,000 in profit, then that's great. Sure. You got your $25,000 back and you got $50,000 on top of it.
Yep.
The problem was it wasn't just when COVID hit, it was before COVID, where it was the threat of COVID, where a lot of these conventions, they were putting it out there, but then they would close, they would cancel it because they didn't want to be the first super spreading event.
Right.
So, but they didn't give people the money back.
Yeah.
The money that the people would give them for their space would go to the celebrities. So that money's gone.
Wow.
And what the promise is we're going to reschedule it and then you'll have your space. But then COVID hit and they never rescheduled it. So that money's gone. And a lot of people, were fighting for the money. A lot of, comic shops were closing down.
Yeah.
So comic shops were closing down, and the ones that were that didn't close down, they weren't buying new comics. So the mid to lower comic publishers weren't getting orders in. So they weren't selling anything. And that happened. That went on for 2.5 years.
Well, and there's many industries that have taken real casualties to COVID, but that's
right.
kind of a sad thing.
And now if you're me and, you're a writer, I still wanted to write. I still was like looking to write because that's what I want to do. But artists were like, they had to go find other jobs.
Right.
So a lot of artists weren't working or they were overworked. So you didn't have anybody. And then, new titles just weren't coming out. And I'm sure like Marvel and DC, like they don't make their money from comic books. They make their money from movies.
Yep.
So that's how COVID kind of really put a huge dent into that industry. And as far as I know, I've all but been out of it since, 2021, 2022. I did go to New York Comic Con in 2022 and there was nobody buying, like people just weren't buying comic books because they just came out of COVID.
Yeah.
But they were there and, it just, it got to the point where it was like, you know what, I did it. I was happy that I did it. I did it at a time that was perfect and it was booming, but I just thought like, it's time to move on and do something else.
Is there a chance that it's going to come back?
I'm sure it will.
In a different way, maybe?
I'm sure like in how things move in waves, right now is probably where it's at the lowest, but it's on the rise. It could be on the rise again. And it's all about the people. It's not the publishers.
Right.
It's about people that are out there who want to tell stories through, visual art, comic book, graphic novel. If they are out there and they want to do it, now's the time. Like COVID's over. Like as we speak, San Diego Comic-Con is wrapping up and it is amazing.
Great.
Like I've been, they're showing Robert Downey Jr. is going to be Dr. Doom. They're doing all the Deadpool Wolverine stuff. They got all the stuff happening right now. So those big conventions could inject life back into it. And you could have like another generation of kids growing up that are like, I want to write comic books, right. And they will do it.
I imagine you've got your Marvel, you got your DCs, and they're making gobs of money. But the people of the world like yourself and even the publishers, they're not making big bucks, right?
No, there's only a handful of writers and artists in the industry that this is their full-time job.
Right.
Most artists and writers in this industry have full-time jobs, and they do this on the side.
So it's basically about the love of the
100%.
craft, right?
Yeah. The worst thing that you could do is go into writing a story because you think it's going to sell.
Mm-hmm.
You need to write a story that you want to tell, and then you will sell it. Your passion for it will sell it to the fans.
But I guess what I'm saying is the industry itself is made up of a few people that are making a bunch of money.
Right.
And then the rest is all like, we're just in it to be in it.
100%.
We love what we do.
100%.
So maybe the conventions aren't necessarily coming back, but wouldn't the art continue, whether it's digital?
And it is.
Yeah.
It's not what it was, but it is. I mean, I still keep like my finger on that pulse just in case one day I am like, you know what? I do want to go back to doing it. So people are still producing comic books.
Right.
People are still out there doing conventions. It's not as profitable as it was, even if to say it wasn't amazingly profitable at the time. There's less people that are out there doing it right now because people still don't want to go into crowds. I think that, but like we said, like as time goes by, people will be back at conventions. People will be looking to make comic books, and then, you know, that boom could happen again.
Sure. Okay.
And the publishers are looking, you know, they're not folding.
Right.
You know, they're looking for ways to survive through this time. Boom just sold their publisher to Penguin, and Penguin House is going to keep Boom, like those titles in Boom, because Penguin is one of the biggest distributors of books. So that was a smart thing that Boom did. You know, they sold it to Penguin. Penguin will get their books out there. Penguin will probably be at book fairs, book cons, and all that. So those are the things that they're looking to do. And I'm sure that it was probably not easy for Rich Ross to sell his publishing company that he loves so much. But he knew that he had a responsibility to
keep it going.
To keep it going.
Yeah.
And that's what publishers are doing is they know that just folding isn't an option that, you know, they want to do. It's kind of like going bankrupt. You're like, do I have any other options before I, you know, claim chapter, you know?
So the folk art is still happening, and I would imagine that some people are still sort of publishing their own stuff.
100,
right?
yeah, definitely.
So
Kickstarters, if you go onto Kickstarter right now, you'll probably see hundreds of independent people out there pushing their titles. And it is great.
What kind of advice would you have for folks?
If anybody wanted to make a comic book, if they're listening to this and they thought, like, I've always wanted to make a comic book, I highly recommend doing it. Like, I had a major passion for it. Like, I'm glad that I did it. I have all these books that when my kids get older and if I ever have grandkids, like, I'm very proud of what I did. And, you know, they're not the greatest things in the world, but I'm proud that I did it. And it was a huge learning experience for me, not just with comic books, but writing. You know, I learned a lot. I don't want to say I learned more than I did in college because I paid a lot. I paid a lot more to go to college than I did for comic books. But I did. I learned a lot about writing, and I became a much better writer writing these comics than when I was in college.
But I imagine you learned other things too, like how to promote yourself.
Right.
How to, I mean, because that's not, you know, something you necessarily go to a class for.
No, and I mean, and definitely not back when I was in college.
Right.
You know, back in the 90s, you didn't have Facebook and Instagram and all that. It taught me how to be comfortable outside of my comfort zone. Standing behind a table at a convention and having somebody pick up your book and you give them your pitch and then they put it back down and walk away without buying it, it's soul crushing.
Yeah.
But you can't let that get you down. You know, you got to realize, like, most of the time people are not going to buy your book. So you just, you know, try to be friendly, and maybe the next time they see you, they will, because they'll remember, like, you know what, this guy was a nice guy. I'm going to buy his book this time.
Nice. It seems like the love of doing it. Would that be advice for you too? I mean,
You can't go into, if you think that you're going to go into writing comic books and you're making millions and millions of dollars, it's likely that that's not going to happen. Even if you have like these, you know, delusions of grandeur where like, you know, Warner Brothers is going to pick up my book and they're going to make a movie out of it, you're probably still not going to make that much money. You know, and the likelihood of that happening is so far like fetched. because movie industries, they want to put out Terminator 5 before they put your book out, because there's already a fan base for Terminator 5. But yeah, you just have to do it because you love it. You have to do it because you want to hold something that you made in your hands and then maybe someday give it to your kids.
So it's like whittling.
Yeah, it is. It's like whittling. Just be patient and just sit there and whittle away.
Bob, Salley, thank you so much for joining us on Occupations.
Thank you so much for having me, coming over.
Awesome. Stay tuned for another episode of Occupations coming up soon. And visit us on Facebook and everywhere else. And we're going to give you all kinds of information about Bob and other folks that have done our podcast in the past. And of course, some that are coming up in the future. Bye-bye.
Occupations has been brought to you by lotsofmaps.com. Please follow Occupations the Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to find information about our next episode or to see what past episodes are available.